Everyone. Julian Lampieri, the manager for the Global Engagement Unit at the World Bank, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all. Thank you for joining. This webinar is part of the World Bank's Data-Driven and Digital Agriculture webinar series. In this series, we invite innovators, thought leaders, and World Bank task team leaders who are transforming agriculture and food systems using data-driven and digital agriculture to exchange and share their thoughts with each other. The webinar series is available on the World Bank's Open Learning Campus. So you can see this webinar and all of the other ones that we've done. And you can find the link to that at the bottom of the announcement. Now today, I am very pleased to bring to you this webinar, and I'm going to change the title on the fly here and call it Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, Who's the Fairest of Them All? Open blockchain or closed blockchain? And I want to show you guys something. Who knows what this is? So this is a mail-in ballot in the US. And right now, as you all know, we are in the middle of a presidential election. And we're being asked to mail in our ballots because of COVID-19. And I just want you to think about how one could use blockchain to trace the course of this ballot so that I would have the confidence that I have filled it in and it's going to get to the right place, unlike some people saying things that this is never going to go to the right place. The point being that blockchain is an amazing technology and it can do amazing things for the agri-food value chain. It can increase supply chain efficiency. It can provide stakeholders all along the chain with greater assurance about safety, quality, and authenticity of the inputs they use for their agriculture. And it can make consumers believe in what they're getting. So improving the transparency and traceability throughout the whole agriculture value chain requires a lot of cross-sectoral and cross-border collaboration. One of the first questions we want to ask is whether and how technology like blockchain helps making this process easier. In fact, when investing in the technology, one rapidly realizes that the name blockchain is being used to leverage a variety of technologies with different types of governance, each of them relevant for different uses. So some of the key questions are, when and under what circumstance do you need a blockchain? What kind of blockchain should be used for different types of needs? What are the barriers to adoption of blockchain? What are the different roles of the different stakeholders in supporting adoption and coordination in the use of blockchain for better safety, quality, and authenticity? Now let me introduce the speakers, and I'm going to be brief here. So we have Marieke de Ruyter de Wilt, a very complicated Dutch name. I hope I didn't do too much damage to it, Marieke. She's the founder of The New Fork, a blockchain company based in Amsterdam. Marieke's fascination for agri-food started as a young lady traveling across Africa. She began her career with computer science in that Dutch university whose name I can never pronounce, and worked on farm data for over 20 years, covering more than 50 countries. She founded The New Fork in 2017, and The New Fork builds new technology for agri-food supply chains specialized in blockchain. She's going to tell us more about how she believes in open blockchain solutions as technology to make sustainable food supply and value chains resilient and transparent. Then we're going to have Jenny Walston, who works the Food Partnership and Commercialization, who is the Food Partnerships and Commercialization Officer at Harvest Plus. She is a registered nutritionist with 20 years experience working in the food industry. Jenny is looking at scaling up the use and reach of biofortified foods via partnerships across the value chain. But working with the public and private sector, her objective is to find incentives to commercialize biofortification and work in partnership to overcome barriers to scale. He has worked with Marieke on the use case of fortified seeds in Nigeria. have the link in your webinar announcement, and she will tell us about that today. Then we have Doug Miller. Doug is leading the digital transformation of the Canadian seed industry. He is the Managing Director of Certification and Technology Services at the Canadian Seed Growers Association. Doug is using technology to challenge the status quo and disrupt traditional business models. Doug has over 12 years of experience in the agriculture industry in both the public and private sector, and has also launched an ag tech startup. Doug is coming to us with a blockchain pilot tested on soybean and tracking all the way to tofu. He will share his experience reflecting on the implementation of this pilot and on the future of blockchain technology and the barriers to scaling up. Then we have Sophia Gnick, a senior program officer at OECD Seed Schemes and Support. She supports the management and implementation of the Agricultural Codes and Schemes Unit. She previously worked for IFC in Indonesia and for the CGIAR. Sophia represents the institutional part of the agri-food value chain, and she will put forward how the OECD Seed Scheme has been thinking about using blockchain for its own activities in certification and data collection. And finally, we have Marie-Agnès Duanjon, who works for the World Bank, a data-driven and digital agriculture team in the Agriculture and Food Global Practice, and she will follow up with some questions for the panelists. Some ground rules for this meeting. Participants are asked to start asking their questions while the presentations are going on, and do that through the chat box. So please keep your questions rolling as we're going. We'll collect them all and we'll bring them to the presenters. Each panelist and discussant will speak for 10 minutes, and then your mic will be muted. You know, that's the new rule that they're discussing in the US for the presidential election debates. Then we would like our panelists to exchange together about their experiences, and finally we will dedicate the last 20 minutes to question and answer. At the end, just to let you know, on October 8th, we're going to have our next BBL webinar on Twiga Foods, the links, how to link farmers and vendors to fair, trusted, and modern markets. So with that, let me turn it over to our first speaker, Marieke. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you. As you see in the title, we are changing the title again from Mirror, Mirror on the Wall to the next level of industry responsibility, because blockchain as a technology is very much part of the fourth industrial revolution. And as technologies evolve, demands on industries change and evolve as well. And we think it's important to realize that with with a new capacity of technology, we get to a new level of industrial organization. My name is Marieke. I'm the founder of the New Fork, as Julian just mentioned. And if anything, I would like you to remember this picture. It moves us from the left to the right, from centralized reality.
Marieke, your slide is not on actually.
Oh, that is a pity. Let me okay. So my slide is on now. Can you see it?
Yes, maybe you can bring it to full view. Yes, good.
We will. Yeah? Okay. Also, you didn't see my title slide either. Okay, well, that's fine. So just this is what you missed, and this is where we are now. So if anything, I want you to remember the fact that blockchain is part of a new way of organizing ourselves. It is part of the new industrial revolution, which some call the fourth, others call the fifth. And it is moving us from a centralized reality through to a decentralized reality up to a distributed network reality. Blockchain is just one part of different technologies that will move us from decentralized to a distributed network. And if you think of decentralized models, you can think of the World Bank, but you can think of Facebook, you can think of Airbnb, all the global companies as you know them in your day-to-day lives, they are decentralized models. And what is happening with blockchain is that we're moving towards what we call distributed networks. And a good example is Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency, where you no longer need a central authority to organize the distribution of value. That brings me to a key point. Blockchain and cryptocurrencies are related but separated. So you can have a blockchain with a cryptocurrency, but you can definitely have a blockchain without a cryptocurrency. And here comes my first and last poll. I'm really interested to get an idea of who amongst the listeners is completely new to blockchain. So can you just share in the chat with either a yes or me or I if you are completely new to blockchain? And I'm going to ask Vivek to give me an idea of how many newbies or newly interested people we've got here. So basic point is we are moving towards a distributed network economy. Now, as it is new and as we're all trying to get our heads around what that means, we have another event jointly also with the World Bank and with about 20 other partners, where we help people who work in agri-food understand this technology and understand the implications they have for the food system. So this is just a reminder, if you want to know more about this particular topic of blockchain, newer technologies and agri-food, tune into the Strike 2 Summit. Strike2summit.com is the URL, and we'll get you onboarded from that website. But for now, what I think it makes sense to do, because I'm assuming, or we are assuming, that we've got quite a diverse level of participants, I'm going to try and aim and get everybody somehow on the same level. And that often starts with a definition. This one is taken from Wikipedia. Most of you are probably very familiar with that, where it's defined that a blockchain is an open distributed ledger that can record transactions between parties efficiently and in a verifiable and permanent way. Now, if you want to have a simplified understanding, think of blockchain as a database with a few new traits. The key one to remember is that it is permanent. So once data is added to a blockchain, you can never ever get it out. Second, if I add data, everybody in the network can see that data immediately. So it's automatically synchronized. And thirdly, it's neutral. And I think that this neutrality is one of the most compelling traits of blockchain. It basically means that it is incorruptible. Nobody owns the system. I'm a very big fan of the comparison of a set of rules without having a ruler. So yes, there are rules. Everybody in the network knows the rules, but nobody is a ruler. You as a network, you rule the system. Now, these things are very new, and the best thing to understand it by is, of course, an example. If you get your phone and you go over the QR code, you should be able to come to a coffee company. The blockchains that are currently being used in agri-food are, my rough estimate would be somewhere around 500 blockchains globally. A lot of them are operational in luxury goods like chocolate and coffee. This is a coffee example, and you see them in meats and fish. So products where either there's a higher margin to communicate with consumers what the validity of the product is, or it is in a market where there are lots of where there's consumer mistrust in the product, like in meats or fish. So if you QR scan this, then what you'll see is it takes you to a product passport where you can see where the coffee comes from. You see coffee traits, and you see where ownership of the coffee is transferred from one party to the other party. So basically, in this case, blockchain establishes a product passport. Now, to explain that, to really explain what's happening under the hood, you see here just a generic supply chain from farmer to consumer. And what blockchain does, it first of all, what you do, and this is of course automated, you lock your data. This is called encryption with 2 keys. The data is then packed in something that you cannot recognize, but you can see it's there. That's called hashing. It's like a fingerprint, and it's put on the blockchain. Now, your partner or your next in line does the same, and the manufacturer and the retailer, and then the consumer can read that product passport. And there are 2 things to emphasize here. First of all, you encrypt your data, so you protect your data. And this is often confused in the discussions on blockchain, where there are things, and these are called open blockchains. That does not imply that your data is open. That the access structure of the blockchain is open, but not the data itself. And the second thing to emphasize is that you reuse data that already resides in other data systems, and you don't really put data on a blockchain, but you make a reference to a data set. And that is what you put on the blockchain. So you put the reference on the blockchain. Now, this is more or less the most technical we'll make it today.
Marieke, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The reason why you would invest in it is, first of all, cost savings, and otherwise transparency or traceability, and new business models and risk reductions. But something that's often omitted in the communications in media or even researchers is the key thing to implement a blockchain is because of cost savings. Now, challenges, of course, something that's often mentioned, rubbish in is rubbish out. Blockchain doesn't change that. So the data entry isn't changed by blockchain. The only thing, once it's in, it will remain as it is, and you will be able to track and trace it and timestamp it. Now, the fact that it is immutable is also a challenge, because if you put wrong data in, you have to correct for that data. And that correction is then visible. The network effect is crucial. You cannot do a blockchain in your own. And rules and regulations are still catching up with these newer technologies. Now, this is the last slide, and what we want to point out here is that there are different types of blockchain, and this is the topic of today, where you have to think of the access to a blockchain and the validation. Most blockchains in agri-food are private permissioned. That means that they're very closed systems. Although it's a blockchain, it's a closed system. Then you have public permissioned. For example, Hyperledger is such an example. And then you have public permissionless. And this is actually, we claim that public permissionless blockchains are for agri-food the most valuable ones, because they have, everybody can read and write to the system. And there's also a type which is the private permissionless ones, but they don't really they don't really exist because there's little use in them. So the key point here, there are different types. What matters is who gets access. Is it a public access system or is it private access? And who validates? So who controls the system? Is that permissioned, meaning that are only certain people allowed to check the system, or is it permissionless? Can everybody join and check? And we think that you need public permissionless systems in the agri-food business, because it has such a high importance for food safety, for, well, actually the SDGs at large. That's all we want to convey for now. And let's see.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marieke, for that excellent, right on time presentation. Super appreciated. Well done and very clear. And I love your graphics. I think, and I see Parmesh is putting exactly the same question that came to my mind is, what ultimately is the role of an institution like the World Bank in helping create blockchains? Really, is it a public sector thing or is it a private sector? And where do you get the two to mix together, and how can we help this process so that there's greater benefits accruing to both the producers and the consumers in this thing?
Yeah, there's two big answers to that.
Yep, but
One
you're
is,
gonna hold it. You're gonna hold that thought till we get to the Q&A part, okay?
Okay.
And we're gonna pass it to Jenny Walston. The floor is yours, Jenny.
Hey there, thanks very much. Hope you can hear me and see my slides okay. So my name is Jenny Walton, and I work for Harvest Plus, and I'm going to tell you the story about why we really see blockchain as a solution for what we want to do as an organization. So just to give you the introduction to who Harvest Plus are, we lead and coordinate a global effort within the CGIAR network to improve the nutrition of staple crops. And our focus is on development, production, delivery, and consumption of these crops that are rich in at least one of the 3 essential micronutrients that are causing global malnutrition, which is zinc, iron, and vitamin A. And what our specialty is biofortification. So just to give you the overview of what that is, it is the process of increasing the density of vitamins and minerals in a crop through plant breeding or agronomic practices. And this is done through conventional plant breeding. So this doesn't involve modern biotechnology or genetic modification. It is simply finding the best varieties of the world's staples that have the highest nutritional content, along with the other factors that are really essential for feeding the world. So what's the problem here, and where does blockchain fit into this? So 60% of the world's calories come from wheat, rice, and maize, and that's even more if you are if you don't have much money. So the less money you have, the more you rely on cheap staple foods like wheat, rice, and maize. And because of that, 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient malnutrition, so hidden hunger. And that's a lack of zinc, iron, or vitamin A in the diet. And then specifically in Nigeria, where 30% of the population are suffering from vitamin A deficiency. And then coming on to the solution is, we know that vitamin A maize is a proven solution to vitamin A deficiency. So when you eat vitamin A maize, so maize which has been developed through conventional plant breeding, so when you grow it and when you eat it, it is proven to reduce deficiency. But that's just part of the solution. So how do you actually then get more vulnerable families to grow and eat vitamin A maize? So how do we scale? And the scaling of biofortification of vitamin A maize is held back through lack of access to market and lack of access to a traceable supply chain that gives the food value, so that we build demand in that supply chain. So the solution is access to sustainable food markets is one of the greatest incentives that we can offer to farmers. And then one of the biggest barriers to that scale for food industry to adopt biofortification is the inability to distinguish and segregate the biofortified stock crops from the standard ones. So what we want to do, and what we're going to do, is build a blockchain system for vitamin A maize, which is purpose built, that really suits the food systems that we operate in Nigeria, and primarily is suitable for smallholder farmers. So I'm not a blockchain expert. I'm not a technology expert. My background is in nutrition and how we bring more nutritious foods to the food system. And one of our biggest roles within Harvest Plus is we have to convene the entire the food system. It's not just a case of working on agricultural research or seed development or seed multiplication. We have to work with everyone. And that's one of the reasons why we see blockchain as something that's going to be really helpful to scale and bring the value chain together, in that it helps us to link all of the actors together and monitor each section of the value chain as we try and scale vitamin A orange maize. And this is what we're hoping to achieve with a secure, traceable supply chain for orange maize in Nigeria. So this covers from seed manufacturers to the end consumer. So it's not just the seeds; it's the entire supply chain that we want to bring together. And in upskilling and training low-income farmers in the latest technology, we see these blockchain as an incentive to actually be part of the system rather than be as well as being the actual solution. So with a youth entrepreneur society as Nigeria is, actually being part of something is an incentive to be working in vitamin A orange maize. So we see this as an opportunity for more training within the farming, food production and food manufacturing sector. And having a traceable supply chain actually builds sustainability into what we do, so that what we do isn't reliant on donor funding anymore, and it becomes part of private sector, so that we don't need to continually support our efforts in building value chains in Nigeria, which will lead to increased incomes for smallholder maize farmers. And then our end result here is that we get more people consuming vitamin A maize, from farmers that grow it to consumers that eat it in local markets to global markets, with our target to reduce vitamin A deficiency in Nigeria. So thank you for the opportunity today, and we do have lots more information, and really welcome your questions and how we can really bring this to life, not just for vitamin A maize, but for biofortification in general. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Super helpful, super interesting, and I think the link of agriculture straight to the nutrition issue is a huge one for the future, and how the food system is going to work. So very much appreciate that you came in right on time. And with that, we're going to hold all the questions to the end. And let's go to Doug Miller.
Good morning, everyone. At the Canadian Seed Growers Association, we've been exploring blockchain technology for about the last 3 years. So today I'm going to walk you through our experiences, lessons learned, and where we're headed next. At a high level, CSGA is the co-regulator of the Canadian seed industry alongside the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Our main focus is seed crop certification, which is closely related to what the next speaker will be talking about. Essentially, what seed certification is ensuring that the varietal identity and purity of seed is maintained as new genetics are passed from the seed system to the primary producer. To put the Canadian seed industry into perspective, it has a total economic impact of about $6 billion, and our seed is exported to about 100 countries around the globe. The Canadian seed certification system, it represents about 1.3 million acres annually of over 50 different crop kinds and about 2,200 different varieties. For CSGA, blockchain represents a new way for our producers and Canadian agriculture to tell the story of Canadian agriculture in a new way. Within the food space, we're seeing a shifting environment. We're seeing people more concerned about where their food is coming from, how it was produced, by who. We're seeing more food recalls. We're seeing increased demands from supply chains to be more efficient and to be more transparent. It's been said that 9 out of 10 bites of food consumed around the world start with seed. So from the seed grower's perspective, we're in a really interesting position within the value chain, where we represent that first leg of the journey, but also that last mile from the farm to fork. At CSGA, we decided to leverage our strengths, which are traceability. We've been doing it for over 116 years. and the level of digitization that we currently have within the industry to be able to pilot out this new technology. We wanted to be able to utilize our existing legacy systems and the frameworks that have been built off of the use of our product. We also wanted to be able to explore how this technology could be used within a B2C model or a B2B. And we applied a use case analysis template that we have to be able to see whether or not blockchain was kind of right for some of our business lines. And we decided to implement it on a system called identity preserved programs. An identity preserved program, or IP programs for short, basically start with certified seed, and they ensure that only seed or grain derived from that specific variety, because it has certain traits or characteristics that the end user wants or the manufacturing process wants, get into their program. So for us, a common example here was the malt barley industry or the tofu industry. And we ended up identifying that the IP soybean market was the best opportunity for us. So whenever we looked out, we really set 4 main goals. The first goal was to develop a traceability system that monitored and traced the soybean from the breeding institution to the end consumer. We wanted to create a curated story for the end user. We just didn't want to put data at them. We wanted to be able to fine-tune it and tell that story about why Canadian agriculture is so great. And we wanted to tap into this growing consumer demand and supply chain demand for increased transparency and traceability. But at the end of the day, we want to be able to build additional value into certified seed, because at the end of the day, that's our members' livelihood. So we ended up partnering with the Ontario grain farmers and a small startup in Toronto small but mighty startup in Toronto called Grain Discovery to be able to develop our solution. We settled on a local to Toronto, Ontario tofu manufacturing process. The end result was the ability for a consumer to be able to scan a barcode on their pack of tofu and to be able to follow that journey from their dinner plate all the way through the grain handling system to the seed system to the breeding institution, all along the way being able to give more information, like not every soybean goes on to make a pack of tofu. Why is the one that you have right here, which is OAC Kent, developed outside of Toronto in an area called Guelph, why is that important? Why is certified seed important? So kind of telling that story with multimedia and all that. So what we wanted to also do was the front facing example was a great kind of use case, but we also wanted to have a bunch of things happening behind the scenes that whenever the data was moving, whenever the soybean was moving through the system, that certain things were being tracked and traced. One of the big areas we wanted to focus on was something called market access. So we wanted to be able to flag when a potential issue of market access is occurring. So example of this would be in Canada, you have a variety of soybeans that has a particular trait that maybe is approved for use in Canada and the US, but isn't approved for access in Europe. So what we wanted to do was leverage smart contracts within blockchain to be able to prevent seed or grain derived from seed of a particular variety that might not be approved in a certain market from going there. So we're limiting the disruptions to potential market access for Canadian producers. We also wanted to build in additional checks and balances for fraud prevention. Right now, the systems that are based on the IP programs, for the most part, are paper-based. And within that, there's a potential for fraud. So we wanted to reimagine the handshakes between the seed industry and the grain industry in a new kind of way, where we could put in these fraud detection mechanisms. From our lessons learned from our pilot, we were quite pleased. We wanted to really get our hands on this technology to lift up the hood, see what it was all about. You know, blockchain for the most part has been a very big buzzwords. We wanted to really get our hands on the technology, get in there and really demystify it. We really found that for the most part, it was very similar to kind of our normal development practices, especially when we got into things like the application layers where the end user is interacting. We also found that the use of APIs to connect legacy systems to the blockchain was really helpful in being able to onboard our industry very quickly to this. By the end of the day, what we really came down to was the fact that outside of our world, though we in the seed industry, we've really taken a focus on modernization, digitization, there's still a lot of paper. And so you're only as strong as your weakest link in a blockchain. So there's still a lot of heavy lifting that needs to be done to be able to get a lot of work in digitization in order for these kind of systems to take off. As for next steps for us, we want to be able to take our pilot and be able to scale it up to a production model. We work with over 50 different crop kinds. So the idea is that whatever we build will be applicable. So today it was tofu, maybe tomorrow it's assurances in malt barley, or maybe tomorrow it's assurances for jet fuel produced from Brassica carinata. The opportunities for our producers are endless. We also see a lot of potential for being able to use this technology as an integrator or as a fundamental piece from which we can start to layer additional value-added propositions on top of. So when you think about additional certifications, maybe like organic claims, sustainability claims, all of those kind of things can all be built off of this one kind of framework that we've built. And so while all this is well and good, we have been spinning our wheels. We've been stuck in the financing round. It seems that everyone wants a turnkey solution, but people are very hesitant to invest in the fundamental development of these systems, building these consortium models, bringing people to the table. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done there. So our ultimate goal for what we're trying to do is make a primary producer or a farmer-centric model. What we don't want to see is for-profit companies like the likes of Walmart. They have their own business models, but what we don't want to see is them coming into the system and dictating terms to the value chain. We want to be able to build a system that puts primary producers at the table and kind of allows us to put in systems that maybe work for them. For example, in our pilot, we also built in the ability for the end user to be able to reward the value chain through microtransactions, to be able to say, you know what, you've done a good job, here's a couple $1 tip on this kind of thing. And so it's kind of a cheesy way, but as you think about how this could be applied in B2B, it can actually help bring money back into the value chain. And so whenever the first presenter talked about having a blockchain system as having no ruler, what happens to a value chain if a ruler comes to the table and says, thou shalt dictate by these terms if you want to have access to these markets?
Wow, Doug, what a profound place to end on. Was that the end? Was that where you were concluding?
Well, we'll end it there. We'll end.
All right.
I was pausing for dramatic effect, but we'll end there.
But very dramatic statements, and I love where you're going with this stuff, and I love the imagery of the farmer sitting at the table with the consumer. And that's what this technology weirdly makes possible. I think you're also raising some really, really great questions about, if Canada is, the Canadian government is providing support to farmers to do climate-friendly agriculture or other things, how does that get integrated into that value proposition of those seeds and all the other commodities that you're producing, so that the farmers are not only doing good by sequestering carbon or whatever it is, but they're also able to sell that to consumers? So I think there's some really interesting questions where you can take the kind of approach that you have in what you're doing to a whole nother level. And actually, that's a great argument for getting the public sector in. Look, there's this super active chat going on. I hope you're all keeping an eye on that and participating. I think Marike is going about 100 miles a minute, answering questions, engaged in dialogue. And let me go to Sophia now. Sophia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me just start by saying good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, depending on where you are around the world. And thanks very much to the organizers for inviting the OECD to participate in today's webinar. It's great. So the OECD seed schemes has been certifying the varietal identity and purity of seed lots destined for international trade since the 1960s. The schemes facilitate the movement of high quality agricultural seeds across borders by harmonizing certification standards and procedures between countries. And I'd like to thank Doug for the introduction that he gave into seed certification, because it can be a complex thing to kind of get your head around. The schemes work with both government and the private sector on the harmonization of rules and regulations to ensure that farmers in a country can trust the seed they're buying, and to provide plant breeders and the relevant authorities with reassurance as new markets open up. Currently, 61 countries, both developed and developing, participate in the OECD seed schemes. For a number of years now, the schemes have been exploring ways to improve the efficiency and the integrity of their certification and labeling system. This exploration has been driven by a growing and increasingly diverse membership group, as well as a heightened risk of fraud in the seed sector. And actually, something that Jenny mentioned about being able to distinguish between different types of seed, I think is really important, because as a product, it's very difficult to know whether the seed that you've received is the one that is written on the label, or is the quality that you're expecting. In 2017, the OECD launched its Going Digital initiative, which is designed to bring about stronger and more inclusive growth from the digital revolution. OECD's broader work led the schemes to start exploring the potential for digital technologies to address some of their own challenges. Blockchain technologies stood out for us because of their ability to provide greater transparency and traceability, to include a range of stakeholders along the seed supply chain, and decentralize the storage of transaction information. The impact of COVID-19 this year has raised awareness of the ability for digital technologies to increase the resilience of agricultural supply chains. But it has also shown that when needs must, supply chains and the actors who operate within them are very able to quickly and efficiently adapt to new challenges and systems. Over the coming months, the OECD seed schemes will begin a feasibility study on the digitalization of its certification and labeling system, including the development of a use case for blockchain. So actually, I'm going to keep my intervention really short and sweet today. And I'm going to use the webinar as an opportunity for the seed schemes to learn more about the technology in the context of the seed sector from the previous panelists. So I'm going to start off by asking speakers and fellow discussants, firstly, what, in your opinion, what benefits does blockchain, and particularly a public or open blockchain, hold for a government-based system such as our own? And also, our delegates have raised concerns regarding the costs of setup and maintenance. And this is interesting considering what Marieke was saying about cost saving at the very beginning. So they've raised concerns about cost, but also about data privacy and security. So what can an open or public blockchain provide that other database or digital ledger systems cannot? Thanks very much for the moment, and I'll hand back over to the organizers for the discussion.
Wow, what provocative questions. That's great stuff. And, it fits squarely within the kind of space that the World Bank is thinking of, and exactly how we can support our client countries. Marie-Agnès,
yes,
you want to come in with some provocative questions for the group here?
Well, I think we just had a few provocative questions already. So maybe because we try to increasingly get these things to be a bit more interactive, and I think there's been a lot that's been said. So what I could suggest is just shortly maybe have a first round of answer from Sophia's questions, which I think are really good already. And I'll come back to the floor with my own question, but now I'm taking more of a moderating role for a second. So I think, Marika, if you can just maybe rapidly tell us what you think about what Sophia just asked, and providing a short and crisp answer to someone in an institution like that thinking about using the blockchain for their own system.
Yeah, there's 3 roles. Previously I said 2, but there are actually 3. And first of all, from a government perspective, you would actually want to have your own resources on a blockchain, because that gives complete transparency on where public spending goes. We're currently working on this with the European Commission, but I think this is a widely under-embraced capacity of a system that just tracks value. Secondly, it is really in setting the rules of the game, in having a conducive regulatory environment. And I was just saying in the chat that Canada actually, next to Switzerland, is ruling the game there. And thirdly, governments have an extremely important role in terms of educating on technology and the risks of technology.
Thanks a lot. Sorry, I was muted. So is there anyone, maybe Doug, do you have any, since you work closely with the OECD, maybe you have your own views on that, since I guess you've been following that work?
Yes, yeah, I think the OECD group should be applauded for their actions and looking into how this can be incorporated within the OECD seed schemes. From my perspective, like why we have systems like the OECD and IOSCA in the US is to facilitate the movement of seed. And with that, you have information flowing alongside those seeds. And as someone who works in the seed system, right now, a lot of our infrastructure as we move things around is based on the traditional paper model. So whenever I'm getting information from another program, it's paper. How do I verify this? Or what are the transaction costs there as I enter that same information that's on a sheet of paper into my system to be able to validate it? So I think there's a lot of opportunities for increased efficiency to facilitate trade. I think that's going to be a great pillar here. But I also think that there's an opportunity to kind of look at some of the things that we looked at, like market access issues, fraud prevention. There's a lot of opportunities here that, as we look towards these digital platforms, that we can leverage. But again, there's still a lot of challenges because, like she said, there's a lot of government-to-government interactions. How do we facilitate those discussions? How do we agree upon data standards? It's a lot of work to be done, but a great first step, and yeah, applaud the initiative.
Thanks, Doug. Jenny, since you said yourself you were not necessarily a blockchain specialist, wave if you want to give an answer to this. Otherwise, I'll move on to some questions. Okay. So let me just try to open a little bit with other questions before we go to the Q&A. So I'm just saying I'm not a specialist of blockchain, but did get a bit interested in it in my previous role in another institution. And so, but I must say that I have my blockchain 101, but I still have a lot of questions. And so hopefully these questions won't be completely off track, but let's see how it goes. So, you know, when you hear first about the blockchain technology, the same way Julian presented it, you know, you're very enthusiastic. You think it's going to solve a lot of issues in the value chains, and you know, particularly in terms of fraud. But then very rapidly, you know, when you look into it, one very rapidly realizes that the blockchain is, you know, it's not going to solve what we were calling the origin of sin, or what we hear in blockchain conferences as the rubbish in, rubbish out that Marika did mention earlier. So from the discussions I've had and the examples in different value chains that you can see, you know, the diamond industry, there's a very famous one, or reflecting on the example that Sophia just gave us about the seed scheme, you would see that the off-chain institutions seems pretty important in creating standards. Also what Doug explained about standards. So standard certification, very important to make sure that we avoid this rubbish in, rubbish out effect. So you know, if we manage to, you know, kind of really have a good idea of the role of this institution there, I think we've talked about it, but that's interesting to emphasize a bit. Also, because actually this element answers maybe already my second point, but is that, you know, blockchain has become a very well-known technology, a lot of hype around it. In the case of the use for value chain traceability specifically, blockchain is only one piece of the technology puzzle that complements other solutions, in particular the Internet of Things, IoT, but also AI increasingly for the implementation, for example, what we call smart contracts, which I don't think we've mentioned here. And this because in the case of value chains, the use of blockchain requires the existence of a secure and easy way to make what is a physical good into a digital one. And we need to make sure that we, along the chain, keep the link between these two, you know, the physical good and the digital good. So it's the tokenization and to provide information along, you know, the route, you know, from the fork to see transport conditions, etc. So it would be interesting to hear about this and how difficult it is to implement, particularly in agricultural food value chain. So third point, you know, we hear a lot about the incentives, but I think it would be interesting to hear a bit about the disincentive, let's say, to adopt the blockchain. You know, have you been confronted to maybe some elements of the value chain that were not really willing to adopt the blockchain because transparency was not necessarily what they wanted, because their business model relies on that? Because, you know, there will be a disruption in the rent they had from the fact that there was not that much transparency. So, you know, these create these choke points that you were mentioning, Doug, earlier. So, you know, maybe if you can say a little bit about that. And then to go back and circle back maybe on the issue on open private blockchain. You know, with the interest again in the technology, there's been so many pilots and a lot of pilots in the agri-food supply chain, but often there were different objectives. You know, there's the supply chain management side, a different level of value chain, but there's also responsible business conduct. And there's, you know, examples of checking whether a fish has been taken on a boat from a boat which is respecting human rights. This was a big thing. So according to these objectives, you know, we've seen the implementation of different types of blockchains which have been used, and even the same companies now are using both types of system, open and closed blockchain. I think this is the case for Nestle, for example. So in this debate over open and closed blockchain, we're increasingly hearing that the question is more an issue of, you know, what is fit for purpose. So, you know, for what kind of objectives an open blockchain would be better? And are those initiatives also competing, or are they complementary, in fact? Because is there a risk that we're having a bit too many systems with too many different objectives, which ultimately leads to something that Marika mentions in the blog that she has written for us and which is online right now, which is interoperability. You know, with all these systems, do we have a problem of interoperability? Do we need it? Is it actually still an issue? Also, just to see where things are at with our tech people more in our panel, but it seems to me that there are some technological solutions to interoperability too, so maybe something to bring to the table. So to wrap up on my own questions, and we'll split them afterwards for answers, but all these questions leads to what Julian already mentioned a few times, which is, you know, what is the potential role for different stakeholders in supporting the adoption of blockchain technology for better safety, quality, authenticity along the food value chains? And how do we foster this collaboration between stakeholders? Is there a role for government, for standards setting, for different types of institutional participation, not only to create trusted frameworks, but also needed to trust, and this is another question, create trust about these other technologies that we need to use. How do we trust IoT and the fact that, you know, it measured temperature right in your container? So there's a whole range of different issues to think about. If your contract is cancelled because your IoT is not working, you know, it could be a problem. What's the importance of offline institutional framework for rubbish in, rubbish out? And is the current regulatory environment or institutional environment conducive to such collaboration of stakeholders around value chains? So I'm conscious there's a lot out there of questions, so maybe we could split a bit the conversation, and really I invite you all to make short answers, but maybe talk to each other a little bit, reflect to each other on each other's answers. So maybe starting with the element of tokenization, how difficult it could be, reflecting on your own experience, and tokenization as one element of and blockchain is one element of the technology package. So since we started with Marika last time, maybe Doug, if you have some things to say on that.
Yeah. So I'll start off, and if you want to kind of direct me as I go, we'll go those. So if you've been to a conference in the last, I don't know, 4 years, it's like, oh, we have this problem in our industry, and someone pipes up, oh, have you heard of blockchain? It's really been heralded as this kind of magic bullet solution. And if you look at the Gartner's hype cycle, like where blockchain is in terms of like a technology maturity, it's in the peak of inflated expectations. So I think that says a lot of just like where the discussion is about blockchain is right now. But if you think about blockchain, it's a fairly new technology, like it's 10, 12 years old. And so if you do parallels to like where the internet was at during that time frame, there was a lot of issues in terms of like bandwidth and scalability and all this kind of things that we're looking at right now with blockchain in kind of in its infancy. And so as we kind of go, the technology will really be able to, like, there's so much work that's happening today that to be able to propel this technology forward. So I think a lot of the challenges that organizations are looking at in terms of privacy, in terms of cost of transactions, in terms of transaction speeds that are kind of limiting or maybe positioning the public over the private blockchain kind of deployments will kind of slowly kind of go away. For our pilot, for sake of transparency, we deployed a private network. We used the Hyperledger Fabric solution because based on our use case of what we needed at the time, that for us, that was the technology solution fit. I know there's various opinions on this, but for us, what we wanted to do, and I think what a lot of companies were doing in terms of their pilots, was just dipping their toes into it. Because I think in terms of shifting towards these open things, there's going to have to be paradigm shifts in the way that some of these businesses and supply chains view the world and view their business. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but I think the technology is rapidly catching up.
Yeah, maybe just to join your point there. I mean, technology is never the problem. It's always in businesses, in processes, and strategies, and business cases that don't work.
Yeah. And so for our sector, there's like when you go out there and you talk to them about these initial use cases, right off the bat, they're just like, nope, this is my value chain. I want to have this closed off. I don't want anyone to view. And sure, but I think that as we kind of talked about here as like holistic good, there will be this push for these open and transparent chains in the future, I believe.
Thanks. Yeah. Marika, you want to add to this, maybe further than that, saying that how there's all these initiatives now. Are we crowding out a little bit the goods versus the maybe not sustainable systems? Is it going to be more difficult to implement now?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is not thinking, but this is sort of facts. We know this, that all technologies go through a certain hype cycle, which is good because then we can anticipate on what is happening.
Yeah.
And open public blockchains are essentially about decentralized governance. And if there's something that we humanity find difficult to do, is to decentralize power. That's where it boils down to. And that I'm very positive on that. We will make small steps towards a more decentralized world, but it takes time. And the reason why everybody starts off with Hyperledger and safe systems is that it's a little step into the future, but you still understand how things work. And that makes sense, why go, we don't have all to go the 6 miles down the road. So I think experimentation is important, and yeah, it's fine if you fail, and it's fine if you find different conclusions. And I actually challenge people to not sort of duplicate what other people do, but really think about it, what makes sense for your own sake. Start with the problem rather than with the technology. And I mean, of course, for technologists and people who like technology, you always want to implement the best of the best. But reality is that take small steps, and then experimenting with blockchain either way is a good thing to do.
Can I jump in there? I think one of the things that I've increasingly heard from the public sector is that as Doug was saying, we're in a certain stage of the hype cycle. We're in a process of development. There are problems that are arising. Bugs are being kind of weeded out of the system. And I think for the public sector, when there isn't that much money going around, they will often look to the private sector to take on that initial experimentation period with technologies and weed out those problems, because they don't want to be the ones making mistakes with public money, which is understandable. So I think it's interesting what you've been saying, because although we should be encouraging it in precisely those areas and keeping these things more public, more open, I think that gamble is not something that comes naturally to
yeah, definitely. And that's also, I mean, there's, for example, there's two things that are often sort of confused, is that you've got open source development and you've got open blockchains. And an open blockchain is the open word in the open blockchain refers to access and validation. In open source development, you work in an open kitchen. So everybody can join and everybody can see what I'm cooking. And in open source development, I actually think that government has a very strong role. And I think that there's we could really make a big leap forward if, for example, government, including NGOs, including sort of for good money, has stricter demands on the way how technology is developed. So not only what it does, but also how you develop it. And the reason I bring this up is that if you develop in an open source fashion, and blockchain in many instances it really makes the system more robust. And I would call on government, well, maybe public, civil society workers in this group to really, dare to sort of demand open source development or more open innovation processes. I think that's already a really good start. And it's just including one line into your terms of reference.
Great point, Marieke. And so this is something we're debating very much inside the World Bank: is should all the procurement that governments do that's financed by the World Bank include some sort of specification on interoperability or so on and so forth. And it's we're not there yet, but it's an interesting issue for us to debate. So look, there's this very active chat space going on, and I'm gonna try to come in with a couple of the big questions. And I'm going to start with Marieke, and I'll try to go through in the order of the presenters. We have about half an hour to go, 25 minutes. So Marieke, some of the big questions that are coming up based on your presentation have to do with scalability, right? So what are the obstacles to scalability? And I think there's a very interesting question, because one of the unique features of the digital technology is that once you build it, you can just keep adding users at virtually zero cost and doing transactions at close to zero marginal cost, right? And so why are we seeing it in high value chains and not low value chains? Although I guess Doug is giving us an example in soy. But you would think
Yeah.
that actually there's a lot to be made in a large volume, low cost business, as well as a high volume, or low volume, high cost business. So the
Yeah.
scalability question, and the other question I want you to answer is, where do we start as the public sector? Where is the point of entry on this? Over
Yeah.
to you, Marike.
Thank you. Yeah, on scalability, as Doc said, the technology is 11 years old, but the components of the technology, like encryption, like hashing, are much older. So I would even say we are now entering the maturity level of it, and that also has a big repercussion on scalability. Whereas even 3 years ago, scalability was very much in the discussion of energy consumption. Now, today we have very efficient ways of implementing blockchain, where you reuse the blockchain power of an existing blockchain. So you build like a side chain and you tie that to another blockchain system. And that really increases the efficiency level and therefore the scalability potential. So I would say the more open, the more public a system, the more scalable it is. And scalability today is in a much better place than it was last year, the year before there. What can really help scalability is rules and regulations. So, and that can go from one hand to say the privacy laws like the GDPR as we have it in Europe, but it can also be like we've seen in Australia, where the government says you are obliged to have your supply chain transparent, because then scalability is there as it hasn't been without that sort of regulatory environment. So I think on scalability, technically, we are in a much better space. So blockchain is definitely scalable. You see that in the implementations. To date, I really think per week we have hundreds of new blockchains up in the air. Regulatory environment can really help accelerate scalability. And on the role of the public, start to get to understand the technology. Not only, I'm a big believer of if you have to make rules about something, you need to understand it, and you only understand it if you have skin in the game, if you have it implemented somewhere, and you can implement it at different levels. So you don't need to do it at a large scale for that sake. But I think, for example, just to have one public fund backed by blockchain would be a good start. And look at countries where they're more advanced, and these countries are definitely Canada and Switzerland, but also Estland, Estonia.
All right. Thank you, Marike. Very interesting. So let's go to Jenny here, who's been quite silent, but I want to bring her in. So Jenny, a couple questions for you. There seems to be a lot of people are saying, what is the information exactly that the producers start entering into the system? And, where are the best examples of early adopters and success in the examples you gave in sort of biofortification and so on? And I guess a third question is, the data is hugely valuable, both on the producer and consumer end. And how do you actually protect that while at the same time exploiting it? Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you. I'll try and answer in reverse order. So on the data, we see this as really valuable, not in terms of just monitoring sort of food supply chains, but also as an impact and assessment. So if we had a blockchain system, we could better understand where biofortified foods are going and who's using them, and then that would allow us to examine the nutritional impact a lot easier. So there's that side of things. Especially in maize, it would be really helpful to have in the aflatoxin contamination problem. So if we had a traceable supply chain in maize, we would know where the aflatoxin issues are coming from and where they're going, who's consuming it, and would help us be able to tackle aflatoxins as well. So the data would be so powerful in so many different ways for us to be able to use. And why shouldn't that be open if other organizations want to be able to sort of mine that data to say, you know, who's using this kind of seed and who's not, then we're very open to that data being available to anybody who needs to research it. And I suppose coming on to the other question, you know, how I think it's more like, you know, how do people use it? One of the biggest questions that I get, even within our own organization, is, you know, blockchain sounds complicated, it sounds expensive, and, you know, how do people actually engage with it and how do they use it? I would imagine there's going to be, you know, many cases where people who are involved in the traceability system might not even be aware that it's part of the blockchain system, and they perhaps don't even need to know. It's just a system of documenting the transaction. So if you're a farmer and you've purchased the seeds from the genuine seed house who sells biofortification, then it's just documenting that transaction and the transaction going into the open ledger. So it's and then everybody within the chain just doing their piece just to document the transaction, and that's whether it's through a smartphone. And then if people don't have access to smartphones, it's do they have contact with somebody in their community that does. So it does not have to be complicated by any means. And I find that, you know, one of the barriers that we might be dealing with is just people have a perception of what blockchain is. And quite often it's wrong. And if I said, oh, we're investing in a traceability system that's something, they'd be like, oh wow, that's great, we really need that. But then as soon as you say blockchain, like, oh, that's really expensive, and that's way too technical for smallholders who aren't going to be able to access that. So there's definitely a misconception and a belief that, you know, this is too technical and it's going to be too difficult for smallholders to adopt, which I don't believe it is necessarily true.
Julian, to jump off, to expand on that point, I think she's spot on there. The sooner we can get from talking about blockchain to talking about the value proposition of what she's talking about, it transforms the discussion. Whenever I'm in with my team and we're talking about deploying a new web app, we don't start by talking about the underlying protocols that develop the internet, right? It's just, this is the best technology for it. This is it. Let's get to a point wherever we're not just saying blockchain, because like I think people are going to be trying to poke holes at it in this because it's a new technology. They're not familiar with it. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And so I think just selling the value proposition, how this process that you're building or this is going to be able to provide value for whoever's using it.
Great. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Jenny, for the superb intervention. So, Doug, let me put you on the hot seat. Sorry, does someone want to come in?
Yeah.
Marika?
Can I ask a question to Julian that actually came from Ronald Leo Sullivan? So what is holding the World Bank back to sort of implement blockchain as the monitoring technology for your public spending?
It's a very good question. I guess, what are we exactly trying to solve with using blockchain to monitor our public spending? So what is the problem we're trying to solve is the question I would ask. And I think that someone made that point earlier about, you know, don't start with the technology, but start with the problem. So, you know, what are we trying to figure out about our public spending exactly, and how can blockchain help us solve that or adjust that, is what I would turn that around to. And I think just like I was giving an example at the outset of this with my little ballot here, and can we actually use blockchain to solve part of our voting problem? You know,
yeah,
I think it's the same space. So let me just get to Doug here, Marika, and then when we have a couple minutes, we'll get into sort of what the World Bank can do towards the end. But I'm happy to take that up offline also. So Doug, a couple questions for you. One is, tell us a little bit about your organization. Are you a public organization or a private organization or some sort of hybrid? And, are you getting funding from groups of farmers? It would be very interesting to hear, because maybe that's part of the reason you were able to do this, was the particular nature of your organization. I think the second question I wanted to ask you is, have you taken this to any countries, and are you doing any work sort of transferring this pilot to other places to try to scale it up, particularly in the developing world? And then the third, and this isn't exactly what Marieke was asking, but it's a corollary, is this idea of what would a project where the World Bank actually helped kick this off in a developing country look like, in your view? Over to you, Doug.
All right. Well, the Canadian Seed Growers Association is a not-for-profit organization that was established in 1904. It was a government function up until that point, but it was put at an arm's length. So we work very closely with the government. We're referenced in the Federal Seeds Act and regulations as having certain responsibilities. So my membership is 3,500 seed growers from Prince Edward Island to Victoria Island, so spanning the whole country of Canada. And we are essentially a seed crop certification body. So we set standards, we do that kind of work. So we were able to pilot through some of the innovation initiatives that Agriculture Canada has in place. So we were very fortunate to be able to do that. We partnered and leveraged some like our downstream end users, like the Grain Farmers of Ontario, who also contributed, and then also being able just to connect with great Canadian talent like Grain Discovery. In terms of transferring the pilot to other areas, it's definitely something that we're focused on. I know we've had discussions. Seed certification is not a concept unique to Canada. There is lots of developing countries around the world that can utilize this technology, especially that have seed certification programs that can be able to use the foundations of why systems like that exist to ensure that high quality seed is being produced, that they're being able to transfer genetics to the new genetics to the primary producers. Those systems are there. So there's an opportunity to take the framework that we've done, being able to take a seed certification system and be able to connect downstream into the value chain. But then also working with government institutions like our CFIA partners to be able in the future to be able to say, this is the kind of information that we can provide you. How can we maybe look at how we regulate this industry in new kind of ways? In terms of like next steps, what groups like this can do, it's really about bringing people together to be able to have these discussions. It's for us, whenever we look at how we can deploy some of these use cases, it's really about understanding the needs or the problems of that value chain. So for example, I can't just sit in my ivory tower in Toronto and say, this is how this blockchain system is going to roll out. You need to be able to facilitate discussions, collaborations, and then also to help them be able to secure financing to be able to take their vision to a reality.
Great, thanks a lot, Doug. And so let me go last with a question to Sophia. So Sophia, are we at the point where we know how to advise government on the key things that they need to regulate? Or should we be entirely focused on creating regulatory sandboxes when it comes to open or closed, or how much the data should be shared and who has the right to see it? What's the experience in OECD, and what's your advice to developing countries as they move along this path at warp speed?
Well, that is a great question, and one that I'm not sure I am best placed to answer. I know that OECD has done a considerable amount of work on cross-border data flows and the kind of regulations that should accompany some of these technologies that are emerging. And there's a huge, I mean, anyone who's interested in this, there is a huge amount of literature that's been produced by OECD people who work specifically on blockchain, but also in areas such as trade and agriculture. So I would say, you know, make use of that material, because I know that there's a lot of work being done. In terms of regulatory frameworks, I think OECD, the OECD seed schemes is a particularly interesting case for blockchain, because we have a lot of the rules and regulations in place already for our particular government bodies that we work with. And we have a lot of the processes are established. The data collection that needs to be done is already there, but as Doug was saying, you know, it's mostly paper-based at the moment. And we also have a network of stakeholders that's very willing to work with each other and exchange information. So we're quite fortunate in the sense that we have that kind of external infrastructure that that Marie-Agnès was talking about earlier in place already. And there is a certain amount of trust already there between the relevant authorities. So I think that's a real positive. But that existing system itself kind of, I think, keeps people stuck a little bit as well. And so I think one of the challenge, and there have been a number of countries have already set up their own national databases and digital systems. So this question of interoperability comes out again, and we're going to be looking at kind of, you know, how do you set up that network between a number of different existing digital systems. In terms of advice for developing countries, we have a number of developing countries that are members of the seed scheme, and obviously I mentioned earlier, you know, one of the challenges we've been facing is that our members are at different stages of development, have different capacities, have different resources available to them. But one of the things that we're going to be doing with our particular project in this feasibility study is to be trying to understand how these different countries with their different capacities can work and operate in the same system. And that network of stakeholders and that existing relationship that's been being developed since the 1960s is going to be really important in kind of making that system smoothly and ensuring that we are inclusive and as inclusive as possible, and ensure that all countries have the kind of the support that they need to develop the right system for them.
Great, fantastic, Sophia, really interesting. So now comes the challenge part of the exercise. I want all four of you to get ready for this. You are going to have exactly a minute to answer this question. And obviously the one that goes last is going to have the most time to think about what they say. And the one that goes first is going to have the least. And I'm going to get to choose who goes first and who goes last. So you're walking into the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya, and the minister happens to be in the elevator with you. You have a minute to give him a pitch on what he should do related to this big project on seeds that he has asked the World Bank to invest in, and you are a task team leader responsible for designing and executing the deal on this project, and you have $500 million that you can do that with. Marieke, what are the 3 things that you tell the minister in the elevator so that you can walk out with a deal sealed and done?
Thank you, Julian. Okay. Blockchain is essential part of the new industrial revolution. So if you want your seeds to move with you into the next era, get your head around blockchain. For that, you do need a good blockchain team. So use part of your funding to get new staff in your ministry who understand what blockchain really is and get them to work with the content experts, with the seed people. That's the key. That's what you need first. Everything
Thank
else.
you. Thank you, Marieke. Jenny, what do you tell the minister?
I would say that Kenya is being, held back by the burden of malnutrition, and that a blockchain solution can not only start to really eradicate iron deficiency, anemia in Kenya, but also upskill a nation of emerging ag tech specialists. So with a small investment in one technology, we can kill a lot of birds. And also, we don't need that kind of money. It's not that expensive to implement. So I can save him money.
Thank you, Jenny. Doug, what do you tell the minister?
How do we make your country's seed system more reliable and resilient? We can use technology like blockchain to be able to leapfrog over the slow Canadian systems, to be able to provide high quality seed that gives you complete traceability and transparency, so that your people and your consumers of your products will have insights and trust in where their food is coming from.
Thank you, Doug. Sophia.
I would say that although it sounds like a scary technology, you're not starting from scratch. You have a lot of the systems and the infrastructure that you need in place. You obviously have a great ministry and a great team that you're working with already. But what this can do is just provide you with greater assurances over what's happening within the seed sector, and you're going to be provided with better data that is going to be able to give you great information to help you make more strategic decisions going into the future. So it's an investment, as Marieke said at the beginning, it's an investment in the future.
Great, thanks so much, Sophia. Now I want to just turn it over to see Parmesh. Are you there? Can you come online a second?
Sure. I'm there.
Can we see you?
I can. Yes, I'm there now.
Hey, okay, everyone. So this is Parmesh Shah. He is the godfather, godmother, aunt, uncle, whatever you need of the What's Cooking Digital Agriculture webinar series. Parmesh, you have time for one question to one of the panelists.
Okay. So the question is that if we had to do a proof of concept with a group of teams working on certification, working on seed, how would you go about asking us to do that? Now, how will we do that and really do this in the next 1 year? Tell us, what are the 2 things we need to do there? I want to do this.
We're not going to have time for more than one person to answer, so you need to choose.
Jenny.
You're muted, Parmesh. You're muted.
Go Jenny. Say Jenny.
Jenny, go ahead.
I would say pick a value chain and pick a country with a problem like Nigeria, like orange maize, and with a problem like vitamin A deficiency, and go for it. All we have to do is just bring everybody together and get everyone to do it. We're not going to make any progress if we don't actually start something.
All right, I love it. Thank you for that. I already have the Marieke.
Right? I'm sorry, I'm just going to reiterate that for Harvest Plus, it's just to push the start button.
All right, fantastic. Look, I've got the pilot for you already, Parmesh. So let's talk about that after this meeting. Listen, everyone, a huge thank you to all of you. Please go check out the blog series on What's Cooking at the World Bank. We have a whole series of really cool blogs about all of these issues related to data-driven digital agriculture. And the next webinar is in 1 week's time. Is that right, Parmesh?
That's correct. Right? That's correct. 8th with Twiga Foods in Kenya.
On the 8th with Twiga Foods. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please follow up as necessary. I know that Marieke has got me on the hook here regarding traceability of the bank's money. Whoa, that's a big issue. All right, folks.
Can do.
You have a great day.
Thank you all for
Bye.
listening and tuning in. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.